My experience using the discussion board has been surprisingly rewarding because the students did not expect me to be in there responding with them, conversing with them, really on the same plane with them, discussing back and forth their ideas. And so not only did they appreciate when I would be a part of the conversation, not trying to control it, but trying to be a helpful influencer in the conversation through my own perspective and my own expertise, but really in there among them in a way that feels more equal often than in the classroom. So they appreciate that, but then they also appreciate the model that I can provide, when I can provide it, of what it means to offer a substantive engagement in a discussion board. So they learn not only from the content of what I'm doing in the discussion, but from the form of it as well, in a way that, again, is similar to what I would do in the classroom, but also distinct, because in the discussion board, everybody in principle and almost always in practice has an equal voice and equal contribution to make.
Managing online discussion boards. From the beginning of a course onwards, I follow what I call the 3 Ps of managing online discussion boards. They're perspective, process, and potential for learning. First, perspective. I stress from the beginning of the class onward that each student has a unique perspective on each of the issues that we're going to address in the class, and I invite them to use the discussion board to focus upon how they bring a unique, creative, and original vision to whatever the issue or topic that we discuss, and to share that with others. Second key for managing online discussions is process. I have a word length and I have dates, deadlines for posting. I ask students to follow the guidelines very carefully, the process guidelines very carefully. I say that by following the word length and getting their posts in when they're due, that's essential for creating an online learning community. And especially the length, that if everybody stays to the length, then that creates that generates material every week that everybody can manageably read and process and reflect upon. If people start going way beyond the length, then that becomes burdensome or cumbersome for people to process. So, and then also looking at process, that they keep focus. Because there's a word length, they need to have a focused response. And so you start out with a subject line. Start with that subject line and be really focused upon that, and focused on answering whatever the question is for discussion for that week. I also provide what I call an open forum. If people have other questions or other things they want to share, they can do that every week on the open forum. But the weekly discussion, in order to have effective discussion, we have to follow the process carefully and keep focused. So the 3 Ps are first perspective, process, and the other's potential for learning. I begin each online class by having students fill out what I call a information sheet, and it tells me about their background, and I have them share that information sheet with the other students in the class. And I structure the discussion forum so that I'm attentive, and I encourage them to be attentive on what each person's particular interests are, and how do we address those interests in our discussion so that the learning becomes personal for them. At the same time, I try to balance that with what I see as the central points for each issue we're discussing. I also try to balance that personal learning with a focus on how do we create a group dynamic, a group conversation. And then the last thing, in terms of the potential for learning, one of the things that I always do every week when I read the discussion board post is I ask myself, what did I learn this week? And when I comment on posts, I try to make a point of talking about what I learned from them. And sometimes when I do a post in response to students or a group of posts, I'll pull out a quote from those students, and I'll talk about what I learned from that quote and reflecting upon that quote. And so it's how do I maximize their potential for learning, but how do I model for them how we can learn from one another?
Yeah, for example, in the discussion forums, which are usually a weekly event. One of the main features of my online courses, and what I see is full participation from all students, whereas face-to-face learning, you get a handful of students, as educators are well aware, who do most of the talking in class, most of the class discussion, extroverts, if you will, and some who, unless they're called on, will do very little talking from start to finish of a semester. In the online classroom, each and every student is fully engaged, fully participating, and it's a way of really seeing firsthand if each and every student is getting it, getting the content of the course, and how they're doing overall in their professional study and training, as well as personally, which, as we well know, is a fundamental principle of Ignatian pedagogy.